Right, thank you very much for coming. And today we are on our session 17 of the Outdoor Learning and Curriculum for Wales course. So we're near the final straight because we've only got 3 more after this. And what we're looking at today is progression and differentiation in outdoor learning. So what I consider to be the pedagogy of outdoor learning. And I'm going to share some slides with you. And all of these will be available to you when we finish the course. So when we finish tonight, I will turn this into a PowerPoint that I can send to you, and embedded in the first page, it will say, for a recording of this session, click here. If you click on that, then you will get this recording. Now, if you have got a Hub account, then please make sure I've got a Hub contact details for you, because then I can just share this on Hub. It's a lot easier. If not, it will be on WeTransfer. And if you have got it on WeTransfer, then it will actually run out. So you have to replace it, or you'll have to download it as soon as you see it. Otherwise, you have to contact me and I'll have to do it again. So when I undertook the sessions on the individual AOLEs, so when we've done the 6 ones, then I went through in detail about the progression steps for each of the what matters statements. So I don't actually intend to go through those all today. Oh, sorry, I've got somebody phoning me. Excuse me. So if you want to know more about the individual progression steps for the different AOLEs, you can have a look at those recordings if you want. But what I'm going to be looking at now in terms of this session is the broader outdoor learning concept and the activities that are undertaken within that, which you're probably undertaking as a school across lots of the year groups, and how we can actually make some of these generic outdoor learning activities across the years actually ensure that there is progression. So either in knowledge or in skills, because in schools, everything is about progression. We don't repeat the same thing in every year unless they need to be refreshed on it, but the way in which we teach it is going to be different. So we really need to make sure that the outdoors is also being used in progression and not just repeating the same activity. So a bit of housekeeping, obviously, if you want to say something, then that you're welcome to, but please keep your microphones on mute in the meantime, because we might get feedback. There is a recording, as I've said, and you'll have access to that as soon as I send you the PowerPoint. If you want to ask any questions or say anything, please use the chat function. I've always also asked if you want to introduce yourselves, to say where you're from, just in case. At the end, we'll hopefully have time for you to have some breakout rooms so you can discuss what we've been through today and see if you can find any little gems that you get from other of teachers that are on this call as well. We're not going to be using any apps today, so don't worry about that. If you need my contact details after the event, then it will be on the PowerPoint as well. So those are my contact details there. So the outline for today's session, we're going to make sure that there is ways in which we can ensure progression in outdoor learning across the school. So there's lots of different ways in which we can do that. We can do it specifically by different activities, or differentiating or adapting different activities. So I'm going to go through some specific examples of ways in which you could ensure progression in some generic outdoor activities that you probably do as a school across the year group, starting from nursery, reception, and all the way up to year 7. But also I'm going to explain how you could include progression in using field trips and how to adapt those as well, to make sure that you're not repeating again and you're making sure you make the most of that opportunity. And also looking at ways in which we can make sure there's progression in residentials, which actually probably rarely happens in schools, but is a bit of a missed opportunity, if you ask me. We're also going to go through some ways in differentiating outdoors. So using the outdoors to either reduce or increase the difficulty of the activity or what you're actually trying to achieve. And lastly, I'm going to go through a pedagogy of outdoor learning as I see it, and a way in which you can use it to improve a whole range of personal, social skills in your students, incidentally, by including this regular, well-planned, meaningful outdoor learning sessions. And this is going to include my outdoor learning skills framework, which I have devised, which is to help you to ensure progression in outdoor learning skills by your learners, and ways to build on what they've done in the past as they move up through the school. So first of all, we need to understand what we mean by this term of progression. And this is directly from Hub. And the principle of progression, it says, is set out in the curriculum for Wales, should be at the heart of curriculum design, a bit like the assessment. So if we don't know where our students are coming from, we can't ensure that there's progression. So that's what our assessment for learning is all about. But we also need to make sure we are moving our learners along all along. And the way in which they've done that in Hub, of course, is through the principle of progression, or the progression steps in each of the What Matters statement. And these are there to help teachers ensure that learners are progressing in all aspects of the curriculum as they move up through the school. There's also the guide of progression in outdoor learning that we can take from those What Matters statement and those principles of progression. So if we use that as our guide, then we should make sure that outdoor learning opportunities are being used to help with progression and we're not missing those opportunities. When you're teaching outdoors, and if it's quite unfamiliar to you as a pedagogy, then it's really quite easy to fall into the trap of trying to complete your outdoor learning session in isolation as like a standalone event and not linking it into what you're doing inside or in other aspects of your teaching. And this tends to lead to a lack of progression in either skills or knowledge, because if you're not using the learning that they've done inside in their day-to-day teaching that you've been doing and continue that to progress when you're going outside, then you're not really using the outdoors to the best. Mainly the worst kind of possibility can be is if you kind of outsource your outdoor learning. So if you get a member of staff to do all your outdoor learning who is not linked to what you're doing inside, so not a TA or not another member of staff, they just come and take your students, teach them outside and then give them back to you. Because if you want to make sure that you are teaching the most effectively and the most efficiently, you need to make sure you're covering stuff inside. You're either building on that by testing their understanding in a different context, like going outside, or bringing concepts together, making it cross-curricular or problem solving and using the outdoors for that. You're not just doing outdoors as a separate entity. We need to mesh those things together to ensure that there is progression. So if you want to ensure that you've got progression in outdoor learning across the whole school, this is a really useful tool to start with. This is a whole school outdoor learning audit. And really the best way to avoid, making sure that everybody is doing the same things, the same year groups, different year groups, is to have an outdoor learning coordinator. And I think it's the first session I did on starting out was all about the role of an outdoor learning coordinator and their responsibilities. And realistically, they should be overseeing the outdoor learning across the whole of the school, just like you would if you had your literacy or your maths coordinator, or you've got your AOL leads. They're looking at it across the whole school. If you've got an AOL lead for everything, then why not have an outdoor learning lead? And that outdoor learning lead can then use this spreadsheet here to think about how the whole school is using outdoor learning. It also helps the coordinator to see what activities are taken at each year group. And if you see that in the school grounds, every single year group is doing a mini beast hunt, then it might make you think, right, okay, are they actually doing exactly the same mini beast hunt? Therefore, there is no progression there. You can also see if there is similar activities going on, because of course you can do a mini beast hunt throughout the whole of your primary years, but you need to think about what the activities are, what the aim of that outdoor learning activity is, and to make sure that there is different levels going on and there is progression from one activity to the other. And of course, that really is the role of the coordinator, knowing what happens at each key stage or each year group so that they can see where the learners have come from and help the teachers who are then bringing them on to build on that and not to repeat it. So this audit also allows you to look for progression in things like skills of outdoor learning itself. So if we think about progression in outdoor learning, you could think of it as changing locations with increasing complexity. So in school grounds, that's quite simple and straightforward and the least complex in terms of logistics, but also for your learners because they're very familiar with it because they're out there probably at playtimes. If you want to build on that and you want to progress from that, then maybe moving to your local learning area. So this is our second column here, looking at your local learning area that is within walking distance. So you might go out the school gates just to the pavement, maybe just around the corner, but not go very far. You then move on to do what I term field trips. So these are activities that take you away from the school, probably using a bus, unless you've got some great habitats in walking distance, but you're away for the whole day. You've got to make sure you've got an evolve form probably put in, and you've got some learning outcomes for that you've got to justify and link into your school day. Moving on from that, of course, we go on to some more complex ones, such as residential or adventurous activities. These, of course, need to have the LA approval. But again, if you've got this as your column as residentials and nothing happens in each row until suddenly year 6, when you get to progression step 3, you're suddenly expecting your learners to suddenly be able to go on a 5-day residential. We're going to go through residentials, but I think there's a real possibility of you having a fantastic opportunities to develop social skills and real life skills by ensuring there is progression in your residential opportunities and expectations of your learners. It's not just something that you do just in year 5 or 6. So I'm going to go and give you ideas of how you can ensure progression in using your school grounds, in using your local learning area, in going on field trips, and also in residentials. First of all, I'm going to go through some generic ways to reduce or increase challenge in your outdoor learning. And these are probably things that could apply to any of those 3, so residential, fieldwork, and to your school grounds. Now, the IOL, the Institute of Outdoor Learning, undertook a really useful research project all about progression in outdoor learning. And this on the right-hand side is a summary of the findings. So Dave Harvey, who wrote this report, came up with these developmental outcomes that are happening throughout the whole of your education. What they defined was what kind of skills, but also developmental stages taking place through outdoor adventurous activity. It was all outdoor learning, not just things you do in school grounds. It was adventurous as well. So in year 5, so it was in England, I should say as well. So in nursery and reception, the kind of skills that you need to progress and develop, I was talking about things like attachment, security, and being nurtured. So feeling confident outside. When we get to year 1 to year 3, we're talking about upper foundation phase. So we're talking exploration. So they should already have that developmental attachment. They should feel they can go outside. They feel secure out there. They feel that they can explore. So starting to be engaged, they're starting to actually follow instructions and do some actual activities. They're creating some opportunities there. Then we were on to key stage 2, so year 4, that's kind of saying, and we're looking more at independence. So outdoor learning using your independent skills. Of course, we are trying to instill independence at all levels, but this is what the IOL decided independence should come out at. And also inclusion, and they've brought in risk-taking at this point as well. Now, I don't agree necessarily with the age groups associated with each aspect of these from the IOL, neither does the curriculum for Wales, because risk-taking is in health and well-being, what matters statement 3 in progression step 2, which would actually be in year 1. So you could do it in year 1. So risk-taking actually is identified as also in progression step 1 in the what matters statement for health and well-being as well. Very low level, just listening to rules and things. So some of these they've actually changed to a much earlier age. And then they don't also include things like problem solving and leadership and influencing until you get into secondary, which again is not really the way in which the curriculum for learning fits in. So I've tried to adapt this and taken aspects of this and looked at key and challenging skills and concepts, which I think will develop with reference to the curriculum for Wales, which will provide progression in those really important basic skills and key outdoor skills through outdoor learning. So this is my version here on the left-hand side. Independence. again, we are trying to increase that at every level. And we're thinking about it at foundation phase. So from foundation phase, we're thinking about developing skills in being independent in outdoor learning, which is getting them to get themselves ready to go outside. So you need to allow this to happen and to ensure that they've got opportunities for this by giving them the opportunity to get themselves ready. And that means letting them try getting their wellies on and providing them with time to do it. It's so tempting to just say, well, I'll do it, it's quicker. But thinking about outdoor lessons, the logistics of getting them out, you think, gosh, it's going to take 30 minutes to get out. We'll be out for 5, then they'll need a wee, and then we'll have to come back in, and then they're going to get changed again. You need to consider in foundation phase that getting ready and getting dressed and back into their school clothes afterwards, that is part of the outdoor learning challenge that we need to improve, and we're needing to actually teach them. So that part of the session is actually really important. So make time for that. We also then need to provide opportunities for learners as they go on through the year groups to be independent. So providing them with a bit more space and freedom to work outside. Now, this really depends on your learners and your learning space. So sometimes it's just not possible to allow your learners to be outside without anybody looking after them. It's just not safe, or it's not feasible. So obviously you need to assess your learners for the ability to be able to left on their own outside. But what we're hoping for with progression and independence is to provide them with an opportunity for them to work independently in the outdoor space. And you have the knowledge that they are going to stay on task. They are outdoor learning specialists. They know that they have to learn with a certain mindset, which is the same inside as outside. So when they go out to learn on their own, you know that they will actually do that. Building on from that, you might find that in the top part of primary, maybe at the beginning of secondary, you can also start looking at them actually planning their own outdoor learning. So them using the outdoors, not just as a location in terms of, right, I'm going to do this outside, but thinking about it as providing them with inspiration for their outdoor learning, for the work that they're doing, or also for a vehicle for them doing, say, a science or a geography investigation. So giving them empowering them to be able to find that opportunity outside. The second aspect, this exploring and engagement, definitely is a great opportunity to provide progression. So we need to think about providing opportunities, especially in foundation phase, to allow them to be inquisitive and to be secure in being outdoors as a location. So you need to build on the independence and make sure that they actually do feel safe outside, but you need to give them opportunities to explore. And again, at foundation phase in progression step 1, it's just giving them opportunities to have a look around and see what they can see. So, so it's not like you need to have very structured, organized learning outside to allow them to explore. It could be just that they've got the right equipment and they can have a look around and they just feel confident in doing that. Based on that, you need to find opportunities to allow them to start thinking about the outdoors as a location for learning. And then once you've established the skills of things like a geographical or a science inquiry, which you might develop outside or you might develop inside, they're going to use those formalized methodologies to actually engage in the outdoor space. So they're going to use that structure to undertake a geography investigation or a science investigation outdoors. Risk-taking, again, in the curriculum for Wales, this is going to start in progression step 1. And progression step 1, health and well-being, what matters statement 3, is all about trying to think about keeping yourself safe. And it starts with just listening to rules and following them, builds on from there, looking at ways in identifying and assessing risk, looking at ways to talking about steps you're going to take to reduce risks through anticipating what might happen. And then when we get actually into what matters, progression step 4, so we're actually looking into secondary now, they're looking at assessing and managing risks. But I think the risk management and the risk assessing side of what matters statement 3 in health and well-being, we can actually bring that into outdoor learning so that it's actually happening in foundation phase and all the way up to key stage 2. We can do that even better than you probably would when you get into secondary school. So really good opportunity to really improve and ensure progression within that. Leadership, again, of course, this is something you're probably trying to build in terms of skills indoors, but in outdoors, and it leads, again, it's in the health and well-being AOLE. So what matters statement 3 and what progression step 1 is also including that teamwork aspect. So opportunities you have to provide for them to have a go at taking decisions together, so group decisions, working as a team, and then building on that with progression, looking at the different roles within a team, taking on different roles, and then taking on the leadership of a team. Alongside these, which are probably skills that you're developing inside, we've also got specific outdoor skills that we should ensure there's progression within to make sure that our learners are being effectively using the outdoor space. And these skills are, there's general ones that are probably covered by health and well-being, things like resilience, confidence in being outdoors, such as moving around on uneven ground, and some really simple ones in terms of risk as well. So things like carrying sticks safely, look at some specific outdoor skills such as map reading and compass work. Again, can do it inside, but really good to test it outside. Then we've got some more specific outdoor skills that you probably link more to forest school, but again, very easy to not ensure progression within these. Things like using knots and ropes to and sticks to lash, fire lighting, using tools, cooking on the fire, lots of camp craft, you know, using knives to whittle, using saws. If you're doing forest school with your years, then make sure, again, there's the opportunity for progression within that. You're not doing the same activity in foundation phase that you're doing with your year 6s. So to try and ensure that you have progression in outdoor learning across the school, you need to look for these opportunities in the planned activity to do these 3 things. So if you've got a planned activity that you're doing outside, there are really 3 ways in which you can kind of increase or decrease the challenge, which doesn't rely on you doing huge amounts of variety of worksheets or differentiation, but it's just a good way of using the outdoors to think, right, okay, they got the hang of this, right? How am I going to increase the challenge to make sure there's progression? First of all, the level of independence. Now, I've said already before that we are pushing that. So therefore, if you ensure your learners are given the time to be independent before you step in, then you can make sure that you're progressing in those skills. So making sure they can get ready for their outdoor learning themselves independently, putting on their own wellies, allowing your learners to plan their own outdoor learning or undertake activities outdoors unsupervised. So this is building from these skills. So you're providing them with opportunities to be independent. Using the learning, outdoor learning in a different range of environments. So again, if you've got a variety of habitats or locations in your school grounds that you can access, that's really useful. Obviously, it's more difficult if you haven't. But if you haven't, there's still the opportunity of using it in a range of weathers. And this will really increase the level of challenge. Now, I know I always say that if you go out when it's freezing cold and soaking wet, chances are they're not actually going to learn a lot of content. They'll just learn that it's freezing cold and soaking wet outside. However, if you do go out in bad weather and you want to test something, you're going to be testing their resilience. So if you're going out in bad weather, brilliant. If you want to test their resilience, if you want to test how good they are at something, you're probably not going to be able to do that specifically. You can also change the location to add that increase in level of skill required. So if you're going to do den building, but you say, right, we're going to do it in the field, not doing it by a fence, not doing it in the woods, we're going to do it in the field. You now need to build a freestanding den. You can also, if you've got levels in your school grounds, especially if you've got slopes, working on a slope is really tricky. It takes a lot of coordination, but it's a great way of adding a bit of challenge. And then lastly, ways in which we can link the different skills and content that we've learned across the different areas. And that's providing these real life problem solving exercises. So you might have taught different skills across different AOLEs inside, take it in outside, give them a real life example of a problem. They need to come up with a solution by drawing on all those different skills that you taught them inside. And this really shows them that they know how these skills that they've used inside can be used in real life. You can also test their understanding. And it could be something like creating a meal from foraged food on the fire. So they need to know about food, they need to identify things, work out if they're edible or poisonous, they need to build a fire, they need to cook on it, they need to come up with a menu. So many skills you're bringing together there. Also, in terms of navigation, they could plan a route from the school grounds or local learning area to a specific location. So they need to build on their map reading skills, maybe their compass work, measuring distance, calculating speed, looking at timetables. You know, if it's bus work, they could be looking at timing as well. So there's so much you can bring together, and that's increasing challenge every time. So you could do a little bit of one in year 4, say, for example, year 5 and 6, you're building in much more complicated problem solving tasks. Okay, I'm now going to go through some specific examples of activities which can be undertaken across all different year groups with the potential progression that you could include. So we're going to start with a classic that everybody does, which is den or shelter building. So this is a skill. It's obviously not on the curriculum if you looked for it, but it provides the opportunity for so many skills across so many AOLEs. It's therefore properly cross-curricular, and it's a really good opportunity to build in progression. So this is how we build in progression. So I'm going to do this for a few different activities that will hopefully help you to see how we can make sure progression is taking place. So reception, den building, giving them a puppet, they have to build some shelter for their puppet using natural materials. So they have to collect the natural materials, they have to find a suitable location, they have to build something. Usually they'll just pile the things on top of the puppet. Great. So parameters, very limited. You're not giving them much instructions. You might help them a bit, but they don't have to work as a team, or, you know, they can do it their own way. So they're giving the opportunity to do how they like. When we get into year 1, we're starting to build in some specific parameters. So we're increasing challenge. We're also restricting them in some ways. So we might say, right, we're going to be using twigs. We can't use grass, we can't use leaves, we're just going to use twigs. We could also say specific criteria about the den. Your puppet has got to be able to sit inside it, and it's not going to touch its head. So it can't just be piled up inside. You need to quiz them, or you could ask them about where the best location was. They need to start thinking about where the puppet might want to live. And also you could try and bring in some teamwork there, or you can build in some independence. So work as a team or work on your own, depending on which way you want to go. Moving on to year 2, we're starting to increase our challenge and our progression by going up in size. So we're moving from building dens for a teddy or for a puppet to building them for themselves. So again, we can stick with our natural materials, but this den, we want to be using larger sticks. So they need to be able to collect and transport sticks quite safely. So again, that's another skill. You could provide them with some tarpaulins to make the den waterproof. So we could build in some other factors. Can you make it waterproof? And then we need to evaluate that. So we need to test it. And again, at this point, realistically, to build yourself a den which is waterproof is very difficult. So you do need teamwork. So you've got that group working together. When we get onto year 3, our building dens, again, we could stick with the natural materials. But again, we're going to put in some strict criteria. We want them to be able to sit inside. So yes, it's a large den, but they've got to be able to sit inside it. We could bring in some tarpaulins, again, building on what they did in year 2. But if you move it into the woodland, so the woodland is the easiest place to build dens. Or if you've got a fence, again, that's a really easy place because you can tie to that. You can then start to get them to use the trees for support and for structure. They can start to use string then to tie up. And again, when we get onto the next slide, I'm going to go through a progression in different knots, because of course, children, usually if you're lucky, they can do your shoelaces up, but that's about it. So teaching them some knots is a really good way of bringing in some great hand-eye coordination, but also some skills to help them with the den building. You could also provide them with some help in terms of giving them a design for a tarpaulin shelter. So it could be that you've got a picture of shelters that they could copy to help them, or of course you could demonstrate. So, but we're providing them with some structure, we're providing them with some support. Year 4, again, we can carry on with the natural materials to build a structure, but we need to make it a bit bigger. So doubling. So you and your partner got to be able to sit inside. So it's got to be big enough for 2 people to sit inside. You can also say we're working in pairs. So together you need to collaborate to collect materials, decide on the location together. So you've got lots of that team working and also that collaborative working, listening to each other. So the skills coming out here, we've got communication skills, we've got teamwork skills, we've got collaboration. And then we're trying to design and build a variety of sized shelters. So you could give them specific parameters. So it's got to be so high, or you could say that it's got to be fit for sleeping in, or fit for sitting in, or having a luncheon. And you could provide natural materials, or they could have to find them. You can provide different sized tarpaulins. And again, at this point, we should be looking at them when we've finished and trying to evaluate and compare them to each other and think about, right, what was the criteria? What did we aim to produce? And have we met our criteria? When we get onto year 5, the knotting that I was talking about, we can start to look at lashing, which is tying sticks together with string, which is the best way to build a frame structure for your shelter. So teaching them those skills of lashing can mean that they can build a structure, and then they need to consider the location in terms of whether it's going to be helping with the trees to hold the shelter up, or the weather, the direction in terms of the wind. Again, bringing in some waterproofing, we can build in some humanities here in terms of the rainfall. Where's the best place to put it? Where's the rain going to be coming in, or the wind going to be coming in? And then design a shelter before you actually go outside to add that level of challenge, especially if you're very familiar with your school grounds. They can say, right, I want those 2 trees. All right, we're going to draw a design before you go outside, then justify the choice. And then again, working successfully with a group, but then comparing and evaluating your shelter, looking at it in terms of specific criteria that you set up in your success criteria. So sturdiness, durability, weatherproofing, whether it's fit for purpose. So all of these things make it slightly more challenging. And then lastly, when we get to year 6, you're putting all of that together to build them with a shelter building challenge. So they have to work in teams. They have to plan before they go outside. They have to then build on the design process. So you've got the design process in science and technology, what matters statement 2, which takes you through designing something. So using that as the scaffold for building a structure like a den, they have to design it, go out, measure, have a look at the materials they've got, make a prototype, refine it, and then building on that process will make sure that they've got a higher level of challenge. And we could also add in more parameters. It's got to be as tall as you. You've got to use lashing. You've got to use the right knots. It's got to be waterproof, windproof, warm. You've got to use natural materials. You've got to plan it. You can also bring in some numeracy as well. So you could say that this ground floor has got to be at least 2 meters square. It's got to have a 90-degree angle across the peak. You've got to draw a scale model of it first, or a scale drawing of it. And then again, looking at how successfully the groups work together, we can then look at evaluating our contributions from different members of the group, who took on what leadership role, and then looking at the actual shelter itself and evaluating it and looking at it in terms of maybe its sustainability and the impact of the shelter on the local environment. So that is the way in which we can introduce progression into an activity such as den building. So you're doing den building in every year group, but each one has very different outcome and much more challenging as we go through the year groups. So there's some examples of what I'm talking about. So the first one on the left, there you go, one den for some puppets. On the right, we've got tarps there and we've got wood as well. So we've got a combination. That's probably a year 4 one. And then at the bottom, this is a year 6 one, all natural materials, freestanding, not held up by string, not held up. There's no tarp in there. It's waterproof, fully waterproof, but natural. And it's called a bender, that one. So much more level of challenge there, much more difficult, but same thing, we've built it in. The knots that I was talking about, again, don't think, oh gosh, I don't know knots, I don't have to understand. But the important thing is the knot that is fit for the purpose. And again, if you teach them at reception to use these knots, then when they get to year 6, they'll understand just the basic function and why it's important to use the right knot. So it goes really well alongside the den building. And it really does help you improve the den building if you've got the right level of skill in knotting. And this progression allows knots to increase in complexity, but it also allows for the functionality to be understood so they know why they're using that knot. And that's probably more important than anything. So many people I know, even adults, can do some knots, but they have no idea what it's for. What it's for is the most important. So we've got like a loop knot, which is just a really simple loop. And then you just put the string through it and you can use that to drag wood. And if you just demonstrate that and then let the learners in reception do it, when they get to year 1, they can do it themselves and it helps them to carry wood by dragging it so it can drag their wood to their shelter. Year 2, you can start to introduce some basic knots like a reef knot and the loop knot that we did in year 1. And they can use that to tie string around trees. So they can use that to connect wood to trees. Not brilliantly, but it is a simple knot. Then in year 3, we can use some better knots, which are better for connecting wood to other bits of wood, which is things like a clove hitch. And that ties your string to your bit of wood. And then you then tie that around another piece of wood. That's very basic, very easy knot, but it does that job of keeping those sticks together. Year 4, we start to move on to lashing. And the top right here, this is lashing, this is square lashing. And lashing is the best way to connect 2 sticks together. So just starting with that in year 4, you could make an entrance, which is basically like a rectangle with 2 sticks and then one across there, all tied together with this lashing at the 2 corners, and that's the entrance to your den. And that doesn't mean you really have to have any trees there. Year 5, again, we can use the same square lashing, but also some timber hitch, which is used to tie around larger trees. So we can use those to help as well. And also thinking about making a frame for our structure. And then when we get to year 6, again, much more independence. So their project, their team, they're choosing the right knot to go into their shelter, so they'll know that it's actually fit for purpose. And you could bring in some other projects like this pioneering project here, which is a trebuchet or a ballista. So I know it's not a den, but it's a great way of testing their progression in knots. Now, if you're teaching fires and they're using fires for cooking, again, it's a great opportunity to not only provide progression in the skills that you teach in building, but building on the last skills and also teaching risk management. Resilience, if you ever lit a fire, you need perseverance and resilience because it actually is really difficult. And to get to the level where you can light a fire and then cook on it requires a lot of patience and a lot of practice and skills. So if you do have fires and you can put that in your school grounds because you've got the right location and you've got people who've trained with doing fires in forest school, then it does, if you're doing it right, the progression there will really improve a lot of those health and well-being skills. So starting in reception, it's just about the fire lighting procedure, how the safety procedures. So you're lighting the fire or the teacher's lighting the fire. They might help with selecting the wood, so if it's dry or not, but they need to know how to be safe around a fire. And in terms of cooking, if you're cooking something on the fire, you're probably giving them it. So if you make hot chocolate or hot water and you provide them with the hot chocolate. When we get to year 1, they can contribute to lighting the fire. So maybe they can observe you lighting it, so they understand the risks involved, and they can help gathering the fuel. And if you've got a Kelly kettle, they could even put some of the wood within it. If you've got small enough groups, then you can also do some cooking. So they could actually be cooking things like marshmallows or popcorn. But again, you are very much in charge of the fire and in charge of those learners. There's no independence going on here at all. Year 2, they can start to create their own fires using strikers. So strikers are, everyone calls them flint stills, they're not flint stills. So it's a fire lighter which you strike with a bit of steel and a ferrous magnesium rod. Give them a bit of cotton wool, have a look at the science of fire, so the fire triangle, and maybe they could try and prepare a fire, but they're not going to have their own fire, they'll just have a tiny bit of cotton wool, they might catch fire. And again, if you build your own fire, you can start to toast larger things like toast and bread and things like that. Year 3, again, they're lighting their own cotton wool fire, but then trying to move on from that to see what has to happen to keep it going. So you need to put the next level of wood on, you have to put on some kindling, then the next layer of wood. So you're starting to build on how to make that fire last for longer. And come up with maybe some fire safety procedures, because at this point you may have people making fires, so therefore we need to know what the rules are. Again, they get to choose toasting, so they could toast a number of different things, and you can move on to sausages. Hot dog sausages are great because they're already pre-cooked. Year 4, again, you can start to get them to start lighting the fire for real, but you want to do this one-to-one, and then they select the appropriate fuel and you create it and you try and build that fire and keep it going, get it big enough so you can actually cook something like bananas in foil with chocolate buttons in them. Year 5, if they've been building on this since reception in progression, then they should be able to light and make a fire by then and at least tend it and keep it safe. Now, there's going to be a lot of supervision, of course, to prepare and to help light it. So there's going to be supervision there. And if you are going to cook something, this is going to be a big cooking fire. So for something that you might even be able to cook like potatoes. If you pre-cook them into the microwave and then put them in the oven, put them in the fire, then it works a lot better. Then when you get to year 6, you don't want them to be lighting fires without any supervision, but you'll have closely monitored by an adult, but they'll be preparing and lighting the fire. So the whole of the independence is there, but there will be that level of observation and monitoring. You can also build on some fire lighting skills, some more tricky ones, so not going away from the fire lighting like the strikers, and using things like fire by friction or using char cloth and hay, so taking away the cotton wool. And then preparing a fire for cooking is a very different skill as well. And of course, once you've got that, you could cook anything on the fire. Right, those are kind of forest schooly type activities that you've probably looked at. We're now going to be focusing in on aspects of the AOLEs. So we're going to link to the humanities AOLE. We're also going to look at the science and technology AOLE. And of course, within those, there is clear progression. So we need to use the progression that's in the curriculum for Wales to think about where we could have progression in outdoor learning. So we've got, of course, the inquiry process of geography and history, geography and science, but we've also got a lot of skills within the humanities as well. And navigation is probably the best one that we can teach outside. So we can look at maps and understanding of them. Obviously, we can teach it inside, but we can do it outside by them creating their own maps and increasing the complexity and making them more accurate. We can also use those maps for navigation. And we can teach that with an increasing level of challenge by doing things like orienteering courses. Now, the OEAP have got some outdoor challenge cards, which do a really good set of progression for teaching map skills. But within that, you can also building your own maps as well. So that's just about using compasses and reading maps, orienteering maps, not OS maps. So I've developed here a program for teaching navigation in the different year groups. And starting in reception, I do teach map skills in reception because it is totally doable. So what we're talking about is identifying landscapes and landforms and locations. So we're walking around the school grounds and they're just naming things as they go. And then you can then use that to build a map, and they can do that on the ground using loose parts. And they're actually usually really good at this. It's usually not to scale. It's probably not accurate. It's usually 3D, not plan view. So there's lots of things wrong with it, but it's a brilliant starting point. So they've actually done some mapping before they even get into year one. Year one, then, again, you can create maps out of natural materials, but they can think about, are they actually in the right location? And once they've built it, you can then transfer that onto paper. They can start to draw a basic map. Now, if you've got a basic map or a simple map of your school grounds, a great way to introduce mapping is to take that for a walk. And then every time you stop, you get them to point where they are. And it doesn't have to be a complicated map. It can just be the outside of the field, or something obvious like a path or the yard, something shaped so that they can get that concept of looking down. Year two, again, using still probably a simple map, they can then follow it around the school grounds, and they can add features that aren't on the map to make the simple map a bit more complicated. And then you could even say, right, we're going there on the map. Can you take me to there? So they're understanding that concept of what's on the paper, what's on the ground. In year three, they should get that sense of what's in what direction and what locations are. So they should be able to create a more complicated and more accurate map. And then they can demonstrate their understanding and concepts of the basic map by trying to navigate with it. So we could do a simple orienteering course using the simple map with some of those landscape features, and you put crosses on, and they need to go to those crosses, and that's where there'll be a picture or something, or a number or something to collect, and you know that they understand it. You can also bring in a lot of skills like orientating the map, setting it so they know it's in the right direction, some very simple directions, north, south, east, west, and some simple star activities that they have to go west and find a marker, and then come back and then go south and find a marker. In year four, building a map itself, we can start to think about the plan view, looking at it on paper. So thinking about scale, orientation, and thinking about symbols instead of just pictures of things. Building on that, orientating the map, and also demonstrating some understanding of orienteering course. So trying to find different locations, not going necessarily in a straight line. I've actually started at year four, actually done creating scale maps. So it does work in year four, using, I think we went through it in one of the progressions, one of the other sessions, looking at using Google Earth as a background for it. But year five, you can really build a very accurate scale map, which you can then add grid references to. You can start looking at using the compass points, using that to orientate. You can develop some real expertise in these orienteering skills and getting them to plan routes, think about what's the best way to get from A to B, and also just some good orienteering skills such as thumbing the map, so keeping your thumb where it is on the map so you know when you get there. And so you're building a really good use of this practically. And then year six, again, scale map of the school, either creating it themselves or using it. But if you really want to develop orienteering or mapping skills, when you get to year six, you need to take all those skills you've taught them using your school grounds to an unfamiliar location. So go to an unfamiliar location, give them a map. They can then use their grid referencing. They can use their skills with a compass. They can use their map reading skills to try and find their way. And this is something, it doesn't have to be an actual activity that you're planning as the main activity to a session that you're doing in your local learning area. It could just be something you do en route every time you go off site. So building map skills into your outdoor learning is going to be a great way of just building up incidental navigation skills. So every time you go out for a learning outdoor learning session, instead of going, right, go outside, we're going to meet you by the benches, you say, right, I'm going to go outside, I want you to meet me at 4872. And they run to the map, which is on the wall, look at it and go, right, we're going there. And then they go outside and they go to it. So every time you go out for a session, they're actually testing their skills. And when you go on a longer one, so a field trip or going in your local learning area, they follow the map as you're doing it. So many opportunities to bring in navigation into all of your outdoor learning. And these are some examples. So the top left here, so this is a map done by, I think it was a year 1 class. So again, lots of 3D, not 100% sure what everything is, but it gets that idea. On the right here, these two are both created by year 4 classes. They are actually to scale using Google Earth. So they are actually accurate. So you could measure that field, and then you can use a scale, which is actually on the bottom. It's got a north arrow, so great creation of maps done with a year 4 group. And on the bottom left here, this is an orienteering course, which is being done by year 6. They're using a more complex map, which has got much more detail on it, with crosses on it, which they need to then find to go and do their orienteering course. Of course, within the humanities AOLE and the science and technology AOLE, there is clear progression within the inquiry process. So we've got the science and the geography inquiries. Now, this progression can be mapped into inquiries and investigations that you undertake in school, but also in the school grounds. So this is almost directly taken from the What Matters statement 1 in humanities, which is fieldwork and taking inquiries, and also in the science and technology What Matters statement 1, the inquiries as well. So these are examples that you could do with each one. And I know the progression steps are covering many more years, but I think it's quite easy to split them up into the year groups. So I've done that with these. They're not in progression steps, they're in year groups. So in reception for your geography fieldwork, you're just trying to get your learners to ask questions about what's going on around them. So that's easy. You go for a walk and then they ask questions, or you ask questions, and you just get them to look around them. For science, again, they're doing the same, but you're trying to find out how things work. So they're exploring, they're looking at plants, they're looking at animals, they're looking at things and just asking questions. When we get to year 1, we can start to do some data collection for our geography fieldwork. So we're trying to make some sense of what's going on. So asking questions still, and asking questions will go on through all of the year groups, but then collecting some information to answer it. So we can collect the weather data, temperature. You might do this with your classes already, doing a thermometer outside or a thermometer inside. So they're getting that information. They're also getting those fieldwork skills of using that equipment. You can also do some in terms of using numeracy as well. So they could be collecting numbers of trees, or if you're going with your local learning area, you'd be counting different houses. In terms of the science inquiry skills, again, you're just trying to find out how things work. So it's a bit of an exploration there. So you're kind of trying things out and testing things out. So we haven't got into the whole inquiry process now. We're kind of just dipping our fingers into different aspects of it, the simpler ones, which is the data collecting. For year 2, obviously we can collect data again, but what we want to do is organize that data. So to build progression in, we don't just collect data, we make sense of it. So they need to find some data that they're collecting firsthand. And a really simple one is going outside and collecting traffic data. So you could then count how many different cars at different times of the year. And then you can think about how you're going to put that onto graphs. But you're also going to try and answer some of those questions. So offer some explanation for why there is different amounts of cars at different times of day. So you're bringing that process to the next stage, that what we call the conclusion stage, but also maybe some data presentation and might do some simple bar graphs. In the science investigation, we're going to experiment with different methods to find out the answers. So again, expose them to as much equipment as you can. Now, using nets, if you've got ponds or if you've got grass, you can do sweep netting, using magnifying glass to investigate things which are small, giving them things that they can measure with. So that's how they just explore the investigative aspect of data collecting, by looking at the equipment and just having a go, basically. Year 3, again, they're trying to observe and measure things. And we've got 2 aspects. We've got the human and the natural side of it. So the human one is quite easy if you go for a walk around your local learning area, so around the houses around your local area. And you can start to do something called land use mapping. Google Maps is a great way of getting a base map. So if you print off your local area on Google Maps, you'll find every building is a square. And then you can color code it and you can color in squares. So it can be a house, it's brown. It could be a post office, it's red. If it's a garage, it can be green. So they can do that and data collect as they go around. And before that, you can respond to a question. So you can come up with questions about the local area, go out, collect data, and then maybe answer that question. So are there more houses than there are garages? Or are there more houses that are on their own, so detached houses, or are there more semi-detached houses? In terms of the science inquiry, again, we're starting to ask questions and they're trying to come up with methods for how to answer it. So that could be something about mini beasts. So exploring about nature. So where do you think you'll find the most mini beasts? And they come up with a method of answering that question. And then they find the right equipment to answer that question. When we get to year 4, we're building on those skills of geographical collection by making it more accurate. So you're giving them more specific equipment. So you might have been doing thermometers, which is great, but maybe we can measure some rainfall. Maybe we could do temperature measurements in different parts of the school grounds. We could measure wind speed. Those are really cheap wind meters you can get. Noise level. Maybe with an app, you can have noise levels on decibel meters. And again, if you want to have progression, we move from our school grounds into our local learning area and do the same with noise levels and wind speed. With the science inquiry, again, they're using a method, but this time you're going to give one and they need to follow it. So it's that instructional writing that they're going to be following. And based on that, they'll gather that data. And they need to use equipment with increasing accuracy and confidence. So again, they need to be familiar with this and have had a go with it before they can use it confidently and accurately. Once they've collected data, you're going to start drawing conclusions as well. So you're asking questions, you're collecting data, then you're going to answer those questions. By the time they get to year 5, they really should be able to undertake a geographical inquiry from start to finish. So they should be able to ask questions, collect the data, and then present it in a graph and come to conclusions. Same for the science. They should be able to follow the method. They should be able to ask a question with increased independence, answer it by following a method, collecting data, and also presenting that data and coming to conclusions. Then by the time they get to year 6, if you really want independent year 6s in geographical fieldwork skills and science inquiry skills, they should be able to come up with the question to actually investigate something, either a science or a geography inquiry. And unfortunately, this usually doesn't happen. It doesn't even happen sometimes until they get to A level. And I teach geography A level and biology A level. And unfortunately, these skills are something they have to learn then. And realistically, we can get them to ask them now. So get them to come up with the question that you're going to inquire about in geography, or come up with a question that you're going to do a science investigation for. They've come up with the question, they'll hopefully want to know the answer. They'll work hard. They'll also got to come up with a method, find the equipment, make sure that it is reliable, present it, and then they will know the answer at the end, which they didn't know to start with. So it's a really empowering thing to be able to cover the whole progression steps in all of these skills. And then at the end of it, they are proper geographers and scientists. Now, one of the most popular investigations and data collection activities undertaken outside are mini beasts and plant surveys. Excuse me. Now, again, when fully embedded at the appropriate time and when specific skills have been taught, outdoor learning can be used to show how these skills of inquiry can be used to investigate the real world and really test that understanding that you've taught them in class. So what that means is, if you've taught things about plants and mini beasts inside, you really need to bring them in terms of progression outside to find out if that is true. Now, this is a higher level skill that we're going to look at when we look at the framework at the end, but I'm going to show you and talk you through how to undertake a mini beast hunt, but how to ensure there's progression, because you're doing it slightly differently as you go through the year groups, and same for the plant survey. So in reception, you're going to just look at them, look at mini beasts, have a go, watch them move, ask some questions. So you're not trying to come up with the answers, they're just asking questions. In year 1, talking about our fieldwork skills, we're going to do some data collecting. We might count how many mini beasts we've got. With the plant surveys, again, reception, just look around, ask some questions. Do you think that's the same as that plant? Oh, look at the colour of those leaves. Why has that one got flowers? No, just observing and just exploring. Then we can start counting. So counting different types of plant. It could be different coloured plants. It could be trees, just some basic counting and data collection. Year 2, again, sticking with that data collection method of counting mini beasts, we're going to make parameters so that we have a proper inquiry looking at 2 variables. One that we measure, which is counting the mini beasts, and one that we choose, which is our independent variable. So we choose the habitat. So we might say how many different habitats we've got in our school grounds. We've got the yard, the field, the trees, and under the log. So we've got 4 habitats. We're going to count the number of mini beasts in the different ones and see if we can come up with a reason why there might be different numbers or different types in different ones. In terms of the plants, again, trying to distinguish between the plants and count the different types, not quite as simple as mini beasts, but looking at observational skills here. So is that leaf the same as that leaf? Is that tree the same as that tree? So you're collecting data, but in a slightly different way, observational data so that you can identify. Year 3, kind of question you might have is, where do you find the most mini beasts? So you might be building on what you did in year 2, but we can then get them to start coming up with methodologies for how can we measure which is the most popular habitat. So they're coming up with a method. You're giving them the power to come up with how we're going to measure it. For year 3 in science, we're asking questions about plants such as why they're growing there, and how do they grow? So in certain parts of the school grounds, where is the best place for these plants to grow? And how are we going to know if they're growing well? So trying to come up with a methodology for that. When we get to year 4, we're increasing the accuracy of our data collection. We're maybe thinking about ways in which we can present our data in a different way. So we might collect data that's similar to what we did in year 3, but it's just more accurate. So we might be thinking about sampling. We can't count all of the mini beasts in the grass. So how are we going to make sure that we've got a sample which is representative of the whole? And then how are we going to present it in our graph? So we might be grouping our mini beasts by characteristics. So we're going to say all the ones with 12 legs, all the ones that are found with wings. So you're trying to bring in some other skills as well. In terms of plant surveys, a great one is looking at which kind of flower is the most popular in different seasons. So go out and count the numbers of different color flowers at different seasons. And then that's a long-term data set to see which color kind of is most popular in the flowers at different times of the year. Or you could see which one is the most popular with the pollinators. So looking at different colored flowers, see which one is visited the most. And again, we're starting to draw conclusions when we get to year 4. Year 5, they can again undertake a whole geographical inquiry, and it could be, are there more mini beasts in dark habitats than in light habitats? So they have to think about a methodology, how they're going to collect data, how they're going to organize it, how they're going to answer the question and come up with some simple conclusions. And in terms of the plants, we can look at how plant diversity varies with different environmental conditions. So again, we're collecting 2 bits of data. With collecting the variety of plants, how many different plants, doesn't matter what they're called, they don't have to know their names, that's not important, but then something's different, like different amounts of light or different amounts of water. So if you're growing things, that's great, you just water one more than the other. If it's light, you could have one in long grass or one next to a shadow of a building or a fence, and again, they can follow a method or they can come up with their own method, collect the data accurately, present it, and then come up with the answer to the question with much more growing independence. And then when we get to year 6, as I said, they should be fully independent to come up with their own geographical inquiry question. So based on that, maybe they ask things like, which habitat do woodlice prefer? I'm going to pick an animal. Then they come up with their own prediction, collect the data by creating a methodology, answering it by increasing graphs with their data presentation, maybe look at scatter graphs and line graphs. Then they look for patterns and come to conclusions. In terms of science, again, they're coming up with the question, but it could be more about things like, are plants symmetrical? Do they grow in the right direction? Or is there more plants in the grass or in the woodland? And they're again coming up with the methods behind it, and again thinking about ways in which they can answer that question and come to the conclusions and be able to share that. Of course, progression in outdoor learning can be extended to the creative areas as well, such as creative writing, in what Matter Statement 4 of the language, literacy and communication, and of course expressive arts. So again, thinking about ways in which you're not always doing the same thing in terms of your expressive arts outdoors. With your literacy, it all links in with the kind of book that you choose. You're choosing books which are suitable for your different age groups, but considering them in terms of the outdoor learning concept. In reception, you might have going on a bear hunt, stick man, and they're just hearing them outside. Year 1, they might be retelling them by using your school grounds as inspiration. In year 2, they may be coming up with their own version or their own story, inspiring a new version of a story using the school grounds. Year 3, we might move on to poetry and prose, thinking about the language, linking it to the environment you've got. Year 4, again, using the outdoors to inspire them to experiment with languages. So finding metaphors, finding similes. Year 5, again, the outdoors as an inspiration for creative writing, coming up with it as a backdrop to a story or a character that lives there. And then year 6, there can be more that you use as inspiration. So the plot and the character can be inspired by animals that they watch, looking at how they move, trying to use those words to describe it. Or it could be an object that they find, or something about the history of the location, or any journey that they've taken around an area. With expressive arts, again, outdoors, we've got these lovely natural materials that we can use to create artwork. In foundation phase and reception, it's all very free. When we get to year 1, we can start to build some 3D sculptures, bringing in an increased level of challenge. Year 2, we can share this work. So once we've created it, because in the What Matters statement for expressive arts, we need to have an appreciation of arts as well as the creative side. So you share your piece of art with the school, with the rest of the class, so you could perform it or exhibit it and show how it's been inspired by the outdoors. Year 6, we're going to increase this level of resilience by creating much more complex pieces of art and then working either independently or collaboratively. And there's lots of ideas that you can do in terms of teaching techniques that work well outside, like rubbing, leaf printing, dyeing, sketching, observational drawings. So much you can use the outside to help with skills development. Year 4, again, we can use this design knowledge to create art using outdoors as a tool or as a resource or as inspiration. So it could be that you're creating a sculpture that you're using the outdoors to basically hold up. Could be that you've got a dance that you're using that's inspired by the movement of nature or plants or animals. Could be that you're creating music using the sounds that you're recording outside. In year 5, of course, you've got to perform and produce and design and exhibit creative work using a whole range of techniques. So think about ones that you can't easily access inside. So things like soundscapes, creating a soundscape for your school grounds, either by collecting sounds or making sound effects, creating a film using the outdoors as your backdrop, either with motion capture or live action. And then year 6, again, we're using this design knowledge, but trying to make connections and have greater independence so that you create something and then you modify it and see how nature can help you, inspire you, but maybe man-made structures as well, which is slightly less inspirational maybe. So trying to bring in some progression there and some challenge, and bring in some tools and some techniques. So maybe making prototypes, maybe bringing in some of the design skills that you might do in science and technology as well, in the design one. And you could create something, a large scale piece of artwork like a mural. Right, the next aspect that we're going to be looking at is ways in which we can differentiate. Now, Unlike inside, when you might provide differentiated workshops or scaffold for your learners, the outdoors can actually be used to support learners in very different ways. Now, obviously, you can use different worksheets that you've differentiated, and so you are going to make that appropriate to your learners. But what we can do is use the outdoors itself to add and reduce the level of challenge. So you probably found, probably taking your learners outside, that there are some learners that struggle inside, but then when you take them outside, they really blossom. And sometimes just being outside is enough to improve their motivation and their ability to perform. So you're already helping them and you're differentiating by taking them to that location. But I'm going to help you show ways in which we can change locations to either increase or decrease the challenge of an activity. And for some of them, some activities, the variety of the location can really help the learners and then can make it a lot easier. So if you look at these two pictures here, on the right-hand side, we've got den building in a woods. If you're doing den building in a wood or next to a fence, it's really quite easy. You tie a piece of string to the trees, you put a tarp up. It's really easy. If you want to make that much more challenging, then you take that away, take away that support, take away the trees, move it into the field, say that they've got to build it on the yard. That's really hard. These learners here in the middle, their school didn't have any trees, and this was when COVID was still around, so they weren't allowed to go off site. So they had to build them on site, on concrete, and the skills involved and the level of challenge was incredible. But they created some amazing dens, probably better than the ones in the woods because it was more difficult. You can also think about the actual landscape itself. So working on flat areas is really much easier than uneven ground. So it might be that an activity is easier on the yard instead of in the woods. It also might shelter you. So you might be thinking about the wind. The wind is blowing away their art. So if you take them into an area where the wind has been blocked, it's going to be easier. It could be that the wind is also going to blow their words away. So if they're performing, it's going to be difficult. So add challenge there. So you might take them to a more sheltered place so they don't have to project so much. You could also get them to a place which is more inspirational for them to come up with creative writing. Some places are more inspirational than others. You've also got the option probably of going to quieter locations or more familiar locations. All of these will make life easier for your learners. Now, the same can be said for increasing challenge by choosing the location. For example, when you're building dens, as I said, go into the field or go onto the yard, much more tricky than next to a fence or inside the wood. Get your groups to work in a very small space. So if you squish them into a small space and get them to work, that's really challenging. Or if you've got really uneven or really sloping ground, they've got to challenge their balance and resilience as well. You may find, however, if you are adding challenge to the activity by changing the location, the actual learning outcomes change as well, so that the skills you're actually building on are things like collaboration, problem solving, and resilience. You're not actually challenging them to build the den. You've basically switched to some more soft skills or some problem solving skills and some collaborative skills, less than the actual academic skills, I suppose you could put in. So you need to be aware of what you're testing. What we do inside usually with progression and for helping in differentiation is to add or take away guidance. So we can do that outside as well. So we can provide more detailed plans for what we want them to do. We can demonstrate, give them examples, we can show them. We could provide them with a method to follow, or we can show them how to do it. But take care that you or your support staff don't take over. I've seen it so often that staff that come out with me on field trips, and they're usually parent helpers and they're usually men, and they step in too soon when their group is struggling with activity and they just do it for them. And of course, if that's the way it is, what are your learners actually learning there? So before you provide more guidance or support, just think, what skills are you actually trying to develop in them? So if you're interfering, Is that going to actually remove the challenge completely and not allow them to meet the aims of the activity? If it was working as a group, or developing resilience and making mistakes, if that's all part of it, if you step in and stop them making mistakes, then you're actually taking away that activity's aims. So start, if they are struggling, start by asking them questions. And this will help them to come up with their own solutions. So sticking with den building, ask them things like, do you think you've chosen the best place for your den? And then move on to giving them options for solutions for them to choose. So do you think we should put in an extra stick? Or do you think we need a longer stick? And then maybe show them some solutions. It could be that you show them pictures. So on paper, have a look at these designs. These might help you. Then you could show them how to add to theirs. But again, actually you taking over and doing it. A better thing would be to talk them through it. So, right, why don't you do this? Right, I'll talk you through it. Yeah, put that up there, move that there, tie that to there. And then you leave them to apply your advice. So following the old maxim, which is on the screen here, for good instructions, it really might help to remind yourself whether you should be staying out of it or whether you should be doing something or whether they should be doing it. But I like to add something to this maxim. So if we ask them first what they think, ask them questions before we tell them what to do, ask them what they think we should do, then tell them what we think they should do, some ideas, show them, and then leave it. Then they should be doing the doing and the applying. If you're doing the doing, then you're taking away the opportunity for them to fail, for the opportunity for them to learn, and are you actually reaching your aim of your lesson itself? For increasing challenge, then you can also add guidance in the form of rules to increase the complexity or the specificity of the instructions. Now, this leads very well into lots of the stuff I was saying about the den building, but you could also go backwards. So if you reduce the resources they have, so they have to create a den with only 2 sticks and 1 piece of string, which is 1 meter long. Or, and I love doing this, give them inappropriate resources so that they can choose the right piece of equipment. Now, this picture here is from some den building that I've done on the beach. And whenever I do survival days, I always have spades because we're usually doing about water afterwards and they have to do some digging. And whenever they see the spades, they always ask if they can have a spade. They then become absolutely fixated on the spade and feel that in order to build a den, they must dig. And of course, you don't need a spade to make a den at all. But giving them those options means that they have to, you can really add some complexity in and also get them to start thinking or second guessing you. You can also increase the specificity. So you can add some dimensions to their den. So they've got to be able to lie down, sit up. The good one is that they cannot see the sky or that they've got to stay dry. And of course, great if you can pour water over it and test that one out, especially if it's a hot day. And you could add in some maths as well. So it must have a roof which has got a 90-degree angle or 3 45-degree angles. You can make it as complex as you like. It's got to be triangular. You only have 3 sticks. Again, adding in some challenge there to make it more difficult. You can also, if you want to make it, I think the most difficult is you can let them choose. Sometimes if you've got too much choice, it's really quite confusing and disarming for learners. So they're so often, especially in school, given precise directions and limited choice of what they can do. If you say that you can build anything, anywhere, then you'll probably find they're absolutely stumped because they're like, okay. So that's a really good way of building in some extra challenge and then differentiating down. Of course, you give them more guidance and then you give them more equipment. So you can do this both ways. So increasing resources to help them, to support them, the right equipment, decreasing specificity so that they can make it any size they like, giving them more guidance, and then giving them less choice is actually going to help them. Right, Natural Resources Wales has actually produced a progression model for connecting to the outdoors. Now, it's not perfect and it is from Wales, but it doesn't link perfectly with the curriculum. But a few years ago when this came out, I created a framework that went alongside it to help with schools, because this was about teaching outdoor connection across everything. So adults, children, and also in formal and informal education. So I'm going to briefly go through this, but I'm going to connect it to examples of how it will make sense in school. So it's set up into 6 steps, starting in the step 1 and 2, which is all about connecting you with the outdoors. And then based on that, you can then do connective connection, which means that you basically start to learn about the outdoors, leading on to you actually caring about the outdoors and wanting to do something to protect it. That's basically what the steps mean. What it actually means in terms of outdoor learning and progression in the curriculum, step 1, it would be that your learners have got the skills to connect with the outdoors so they can actually get outside. So they can transition from indoors to outdoors. They can stay outside comfortably in different weathers, and they enjoy being outside. For step 2, they start observing what's going on around them. So they notice that things change at different times of year. They want to explore and find out about the environment on their own. And they start to make observations, and they're just experiencing the natural world. So you probably say that foundation phase are doing step 1 and 2, this emotional connection. Without that emotional connection, you cannot move on to the cognitive connection. You cannot start learning about what's going on if you cannot stay outside for extended periods of time. You cannot get a personal position on the environment if you haven't explored it. So this is why foundation phase outdoor learning is key to Key Stage 2 outdoor learning. And if they don't build on that with progression, then those skills that they learned in foundation phase are going to be lost. And then if you start trying to instill them in year 6, then it's going to be hard because you're going back to your emotional connection. They may have lost it. Step 3, the learners have knowledge of the environment, so they're starting to learn things about it, maybe identify a few animals and plants, and they know about the benefits. So we're talking about the health and well-being, and from that they should have some kind of appreciation of the value of it. Step 4, they're developing this understanding, so they're gaining more knowledge about the natural world. They're probably understanding the impacts that their actions have, and they're thinking about ways in which we can benefit and maybe obviously harm as well. Step 5, this is where it kind of takes a slight tangent from anything specific to do with the curriculum for Wales, apart from maybe the health and wellbeing, what matters statement 4, which is about community connection project. So this is when learners take a personal position on natural resources. So basically they decide whether they like outdoors and whether they want to protect it. And hopefully if they've gone through step 1, 2, 3, and 4, they should come to the positive side of having empathy for the natural world and want to do things to protect it. And then step 6, they use all that experience and knowledge to actually influence other people. So to help other people to either explore outdoors or to help them protect it. And hopefully at the end of that, you will have these responsible, ethical citizens who are created, who care for the natural world. So that's kind of leads into obviously our 4 purposes, but it also shows that this is an end point. You know, we are developing these people. Now, some of these progression steps relate, as I said, to emotional connection. So we'll develop with greater exposure and understanding of the natural world and age. But it doesn't necessarily mean that each step occurs at a set time in their development. For example, using the natural world to manage your mental health is really sophisticated. You know, that's step 6. However, if you're a foundation phase child and you're taking a friend out to play and they don't like being outside and you like being outside and you're taking them out and you're showing them how much fun it is outside, then you're at stage 6. So you may not realize it. So these steps here, basically 1 and 2 happen first. And then 3, 4, and 5 and 6 can happen in any aspect of outdoor learning. And you could be at different steps for different aspects of outdoor learning. And you can go backwards and forwards depending. So it's quite a complex model, this one is. But what's important with it is that we use this to make sure that we're not doing things that we expect are connecting us to emotionally to the outdoors with your year 6s, if they've done that in foundation phase, but we're building on that to make sure that they're moving on. So this is an example of activities linked to these NRW steps. So if we look at just one in the top line here, we've got this emotional connection, so running through leaves and collecting leaves. You wouldn't get your year 6 students to just run through leaves as a learning experience. That would not be an appropriate thing to do. However, you kind of expect they would have done that hopefully in foundation phase. So you could do as an activity to build on that is to look at how the leaves have changed over time when they fall. So we could look at chromatography. We can look at different colors of leaves and maybe do some maths with that. We can investigate leaf area or colors. We can measure the surface area of leaves and see how fast they fall depending on their surface area. We can look at the size of leaves compared to the amount of sunlight. We could undertake investigations into the colors and the location on the tree. Or we could think about what impact global climate change is going to have on the different types of leaves, the time that autumn happens, the potential months that you'll have no leaves for. So we can start to build in some huge concepts, but realistically, hopefully they've connected with the leaves to start with. So this is how we ensure that we've got progression. Really good way of doing that is to talk to your foundation phase lead and see what they do and how they build in progression for their learners in outdoor learning. And then when your year 3s are going out, you're making sure you build on that. And then the year 4s will see what the year 3s do. And just like you do progression in all other year groups, you can integrate that into your outdoor learning. Right, I'm not going to go through everything on this because it's quite straightforward, these examples, but this is just an example of how you could ensure there is some progression. Right, I think we're right for time. Right, we're now going to move on to field trips. So we've done our school grounds. So if you're undertaking field trips in all your year groups in your school, excellent, fantastic. That's the way it should be. But to ensure that there's progression in your trips, you really need to have that overview of trips taking place and aim to make sure their trips are built on the experience they had last time. So I was in a school the other day and they were doing a topic of docks for some reason, and they were all doing it. And so the year ones, they said, oh, great, we'll take them down to the docks. And they were told they weren't allowed to go to the docks because the year 3s were going to the docks. Now, there's no reason why locations can't be revisited for different year groups if the activity and the learning objective of the trips are suitable for the progression stage. So I'm going to go through an example of a location which is very familiar to most for field trips, a beach. And I'm going to go through how you can go to exactly the same beach every single year with a different year group and still ensure progression because you're undertaking very different activities. So starting here with nursery and reception, and again, thinking about the inquiry process for the geography, the humanities, and also for the science and technology, we want them to explore and ask questions. So they go to the beach, they explore the beach, they build sandcastles. Okay, they're just finding what's there, having a look and building. Year 1, we then start to build in some actual structured activities that we want them to collect some information from. So maybe collecting items from the strand line. Then we can start to bring in some maths. They can sort them maybe into man-made and natural, or plants or animals. And then we can look at the rock pool. So we can start to look at the animals living there, trying to find out what's there. But again, no in a lot of depth, just exploring. Year 2, we also might, with both reception and year 1, like to link it into one of the books we're doing. So you might be doing the rainbow fish or Tiddler, And you can start this book here. I'd be doing Snail the Whale. So that was reception there. So I was teaching them, we were talking about the story of Snail and the Whale, and then we went on a snail hunt and we went to find the snails, and we made a huge full-size whale as well. So linking it in with the books as well is going to make it definitely suitable to that age group, and something you're definitely not going to carry on and repeat in another year group because they're not doing that set text. Year 2, again, we could move on to a different book. So say Snail on the Whale. Again, they could collect items from the strand line. That's suitable for all age groups. But then with that, you could then build something, maybe build a huge, like I did, a huge picture of a whale, or you could build a habitat. You could also start going into the rock pool and start identifying things, finding out what they're actually called. We could also look in the sandy shore, in the sandy bit there, the wet sand, and dig for lugworms. So again, different activity, different location. Year 3, we could think about the water instead of the actual animals, think about floating and sinking. So finding some materials, again, from the strand line, making some boats out of natural materials and trying to sail them off out to sea. Year 4, again, we're still collecting things from the strand line. That's absolutely fine to do that. But what we do with it makes sure that it's progression. So we collect the items and then we identify them using a key, or we could use it to create a story to explain. So say you've got stuff that's been some flotsam or jetsam, some natural man-made materials, we can explain where they've come from. I did an activity the other day and they used this great book called Flotsam, which is a picture book, no words. It's a fantastic one about a camera that got washed up on the beach. And they created their own version of that by going along the strand line, collecting items, and then they came up with a story behind all the things that they had collected. And it was their version of that Flotsam book. We could also, some of the other things we could also repeat, things like sandcastle building, but again, with increased progression, we could maybe code it. There's a great book called How to Code a Sandcastle. So they have to write a code for building a sandcastle and then test it. And then if it doesn't work, they have to debug it. So they're bringing in some more difficult criteria for building a sandcastle. Year 5, again, building in some science and technology, we could go rock pooling, but then we could do some artwork and then use that artwork to identify adaptation features so that it's adapted for the environment. We can look at the strand line again, but this time maybe looking for microplastics and investigate the sustainability of the stuff that's on the beach and the impact on the ocean. And then in year 6, we could undertake a proper science investigation into the rock pools to see whether there is some relationship between the distance from the sea and the type of animal that's living there. So we could work out a proper science investigation, following a method, collecting data, coming to conclusions, creating maps, creating graphs on the beach, and actually seeing if what our predictions were right. They could also explore further afield. So it's looking at the coastline and looking at coastal landforms, so large scale features now, looking for cliffs, looking at arches or headlands or whatever you've got in your local area. And you can use the sand to then build them. So this way, we've been to the beach every single year for every year group, and every single one has done a very different activity, or they've done an activity that was the same, but then you undertook something which was more age appropriate afterwards. So this is really important with your field trips. So, and the way you can do that is by identifying the learning outcomes for the trip and making sure that that's suitable for the age group and is building on the skills done in school. If you are getting somebody, an external provider, to undertake your field trips, you really should be dictating the actual learning outcomes for your trip. So if you're doing a trip with someone and they say, yeah, we'll take you out, we'll do this, and at no point do they ask you what you want to be doing, then you need to make sure that they're aware of the level you want it to be at, the aims, what activities, and don't just list things like straight off the curriculum, off the progression steps. Be specific. I want them to do some sorting, to identify adaptation features, to use coding to create a sand dune. So you need to try and really engage if you've got external providers in it. I'm obviously an external provider of outdoor learning and field trips, and it does worry me when I say, what do you want to do? And they're like, we're doing beaches. Okay, yeah, we can go to a beach, but I need, I can give you so much more if you tell me that you want to cover this in maths, this in science, this in DT. And, or even if you don't know what you want to cover, if you tell me the skills or the content that you're doing in class, I can make sure that I'm building on that and I'm getting you to progress in skills so that when you go back to school, you can build on it. Again, just like with the outdoor learning, you don't want this field studies session to be a standalone event. So when you come back, you should be able to say, right, remember we did those skills? Right, we're now going to go and build on those to do this. Not just, oh, we're on that field trip? Right, write a recount. That's it. Never done it. It's in the book. All sorted. Building it in and making sure that there is ongoing continuity with the stuff that you're doing outdoors, field trips, outdoor learning, residentials, means that you're making the best use of this. Now, there is an organisation called Learning Away, and they're trying to, they're running a campaign to provide more residential experiences for young people and children. And their focus is really on progression in residential and skills development, and also for making residentials an integral part of the school. So they want it to be embedded into your curriculum delivery. They want it to be an entitlement instead of an add-on. They want it to boost student engagement and skills, knowledge and understanding, and to enhance the staff-student relationship that you get in the classroom to create this learning community. So very big aims. And in order for they to do that, they've identified this thing called a brilliant residential. And a brilliant residential should provide a range of inclusive residential experiences that progress through each phase of education. And they're integrated with your class-based learning and your outside the classroom activities, that's fieldwork and outdoor learning. And they think that in order for it to be well planned, you do need to have clear learning objectives for what your students want to do and need. It's got to be collaborative with the school and with the venue staff, because obviously you're not going to run the residential. And also it needs to be embedded and reinforced back in school. And this is basically a progressive program of residential experiences. And if you can do this with your learners, there are so many skills that you would properly embed and you'd really set them up. So unfortunately, it doesn't happen like that. Usually most residentials happen in year 5 and 6. Some schools are going down the pathway of having some in year 3 and 4, and that's brilliant. Because if you're building in those skills, even if it's just keeping on top of where your socks are, when you get to year 6, they can really be independent when they're doing it. But what does a progressive curriculum for residentials look like? This is an idea, or an ideal really, for what I think outdoor learning residentials opportunities in a progressive school would be. Nursery reception, I'd be well impressed if you took them on residential, but to be honest, year 1 I'd say was probably the earliest. Now I ran Beavers and I took them on camps and they are 6, so you can take year 1s overnight. But just to make this a bit simpler, I've said year 1 you just have them as in school for a bit longer, so you extend the day into the evening and just have something outside in the school grounds after school finishes. So it could be that you just do an activity outside after school. Doesn't matter what it is. The content is not important. It's the activity that you're just staying at school for longer. Year 2, again, you might go on a field trip, but that field trip might be extending again beyond the school time. So you've got that extended time. It could be that you take them on a residential. You actually take them for one night. Again, that'd be amazing. But if you want to just tap the water with it, a suggestion is to have a sleepover in your school hall or camping in your school grounds. So it is a residential, but you're in somewhere incredibly familiar, very close to your learners' homes because it's their school. They're very comfortable with it. They can always go home if they don't want to make it through the night. Year 3, you then start going further afield. So take them to a residential centre, very close enough so they might be familiar with the location. Provide them with 1 night, maybe 2 if you want to. And then you plan a really nice, fun activity program so they get busy and they're not distracted from, you know, getting homesick. And it's just a fantastic opportunity to get to know them. Year 4, you can then bring in more nights. So we're going to increase the number of nights to 2 or 3, depending on how many you had in year 3. And again, residential centre, stick to close by just in case, but get them to start choosing the activities they want to do. You run it, centre staff run it, but maybe they get to choose what they want to do. Year 5, obviously we're increasing in numbers of nights away. So 3 to 4 residential, maybe further afield beyond the area they know, and see if you can start designing the activities with your learners. So you're both actually co-designing it. Then by the time you get to year 6, when you've got your residential, probably for adventurous activities, you can have a proper 4 to 5 night residential, which is an hour away or more from your school. So it's a proper residential far away from anywhere they know, and they plan the activities. So again, you'll be collaborating with the venue. The venue might say, we can do this, and then you leave it to the learners. You say, right, what should we do? What do you think we should do? Let's design this timetable ourselves, and then give them a bit of ownership over it as well. So that way you are having progression in their residential experience. And I'd love to know if any schools are actually going down that route. And I've seen a few who are starting to push towards the year 4 and 3s, but just think, is there any way that we could actually bring that even lower down the school? Right, final thing I'm going to go through is an outdoor learning progression framework that I have created. So I've designed an outdoor learning progression framework which combines outdoor learning skills and curriculum content in the curriculum for Wales in a holistic model of progression across the year groups. Now, I haven't put any year groups or progression steps down specifically in these because I want it to be quite fluid. But the framework allows learners to build on the previous outdoor learning skill to become competent at using the outdoors, so it's more beneficial, and also providing it as a vehicle for learning. So not just a location. Now, these are the steps here, and I've based it around ways in which you might actually have addressed your assessment in the new framework. So of course you've got to create your own assessment framework. So you might have similar things in this in your assessment framework. So these stages allow learners to fully embrace the use of the outdoors as a teaching tool and a learning tool. Okay, so it doesn't mean you have to have amazing grounds in order to do this. This is meant to be available to everyone. So we've got these 5 steps here. We've got, first of all, confidence building. So this is kind of linking in with the NRW bit. So you've got to start with that. So you feel comfortable and have a learning mindset when you're outdoors. So again, doesn't matter what year group you are, you need to have this. So you want to instill this in foundation phase, really. And once you've got that, that's going to happen when you go outside a lot and regularly, and you've got that understanding and you're being exposed to it all the time. Once you've got that and you can't do it before, we've then got stage 2, which is the knowledge gathering. And this is you engaging with opportunities for learning skills and knowledge outside. So you're actually learning from the outdoors, either a skill or learning about the nature and or the built environment that's around you. When we've got that opportunity, we then need to move on to learning skills, which will help us to explore the outdoors more. So we need to develop some fieldwork skills, some inquiry skills, some data collection skills. These are skills that we need in order to explore further. So we've kind of engaged as much as we can, but we can't learn anymore without developing skills. Once we've developed their skills, so once we've been taught them, we need to master them. And that means that you are starting to test them and use them a lot so that you really have a good understanding of them. But the important thing about mastering skills is that you're using these skills and knowledge that you've got to investigate concepts. And again, it's got to be across all AOLEs. We're not linking this to one specific one, it's across the whole board. And you need to provide opportunities outside to actually develop these skills and really master them so you understand what they're going to be used for. Once you've mastered the skills of fieldwork and inquiry, if you want to use the outdoors as a canvas or as a location for learning about it, it also should be an opportunity for you to test your learning. So inside, you're being taught all these concepts. So the learners, you're teaching these learners all these concepts, things like adaptation and photosynthesis, all these things. The last one of these progression steps, I think, is that your learners should be able to come outside and actually test what they've understood by looking outside and going, yes, that tree over there is actually pointing that way because the sun rises over there. That's making that plant there photosynthesize more. So that branch is thicker. That is testing theories. And that is what I can think of as the really top, that you're really understanding what the outdoors means. Alongside these 5 steps, there is another aspect which will progress alongside the other 5 and at any point during the development of outdoor learning and experience. And that is building connections. So this is developing an holistic, evaluative view of the outdoor environment and how they interact with it. So during their confidence building, or while they're actually gathering knowledge and information, they will be connecting and hopefully working out that the outdoors is a place they want to protect, learn more about, ways in which they interact, which is sustainable. So they need to know how to protect it, to make sure it's not going to be destroyed with them doing their skills or their mastering or their testing. And that's going to happen at all stages. And this should be almost incidental. If you're going outside and you're teaching them things and they come back and they still don't care about the outdoors, then you're missing something. They should be doing this at all points. So what does that actually look like in a school setting? Well, what I can see is each of these ones can lead to the development of certain attributes. So I'm going to go through those, and then I'm going to give you an example of what that would look like in school. So for example, confidence building. So learners need to transition from the indoors to the outdoors confidently. They need to be able to stay outside for about a time, and they need to enjoy being outside. So what that looks like is they can put their wellies on, they can get dressed, they can stay outside, they can stay on task, they're not distracted. They can work in different weathers and they can listen to the rules and they can follow those, and they're happy outside. That's your baseline. The knowledge gathering, they're starting to identify, they're starting to observe changes. They want to explore the natural environment independently, and they want to make observations, and they're trying to look at experiences of different aspects of the natural world. What that actually looks like is that they're actually going out there and they're observing and describing how the outdoors changes. So they might be doing observations of what's happening in different seasons. It could be measuring things. They could be describing nature and making observations, looking at mini beasts, looking at plants, collecting items from nature, describing them, exploring the outdoors, coming up with questions, and giving them a range of outdoor activities and environments and activities to do. So they're building their range of activities that they can do. Learning skills, for this, we're going to need to have some knowledge of the outdoor environment. So it might be that they're learning about plants and animals, but it might be that they're learning skills like how to keep themselves safe. They could be looking at the benefits of being outdoors and starting to appreciate the value of being outdoors. So what that actually looks like is that you could build in some skills now. So we could be looking at navigation skills, so being able to find their way around their open space safely. They may be aware of how to adapt to use the environment to help them undertake tasks. So, for example, where is the best place to build dens? Or outside the trees. So they're looking at the outdoors and using that and saying, right, okay, how can we do this activity? What's the best place? They could name some plants and animals. And again, depending on the level, it could be just stinging nettles or beetles, or it could be that they're using keys to identify things in the pond. Starting to learn some fieldwork skills, so data collecting, surveying, so counting plants, doing some data collecting, how many daisies, that kind of thing. And then some self-reflection as well, being aware of how they feel outdoors and appreciating the time that they spend outdoors, and making sure that they understand that this is a location they can actually learn from and use as a source of inspiration and resources. Mastering skills, we're increasing in independence. So we're independently applying the skills that they've had inside in a different context. And of course, our fieldwork skills that we've been developing in the previous stage, they're starting to master them by using them independently. Again, choosing the best location to undertake an activity, being aware or able to teach a skill that they've learnt to somebody else, and looking for the outdoors and saying, right, where's the resources that I need for this? Where could I find them? And then starting to share that information by providing advice to other people undertaking outdoor learning, because we're starting to talk about these learners being masters now so that they can actually start to teach. So how does that work? What we'll actually see, you might be doing some problem solving outdoors. So it could be problem solving, like we're going to repaint, we're going to create this mural, so we need to have how much paint. It could be that you're redesigning an aspect of your garden area. You could be designing and planning a complete geographical science inquiry outdoors. So they're doing the whole environment, the whole inquiry process based on the outside. Again, using that knowledge of the site that they've developed in the previous steps to do something, to either create a structure or create a wind collector or find the woodlice. So they're tapping into their prior knowledge, using that to undertake the activity that you're giving them. Passing the knowledge that they've got along their outdoor learning skills. So firelighting, using a compass. Can they tell somebody else how to do that? Choosing to undertake an activity outdoors, using the space to better understand the activity. So you may be making a roller coaster and you're saying, right, we could do this in the hall, but actually if we go outside, we can use these different levels and go down the stairs, and that would provide us with a better area. So using it as, the better location. Helping others outdoors to effectively by sharing their experiences. So it could be that they're becoming leaders in team building and designing, but also building on that knowledge and experience to get other people to actually be able to be better outdoor learners as well. And then finally, this testing concepts. So the learners can test what they've learned inside or outside, and they're using outdoors as a vehicle or a location for that. They can also use their outdoor skills in real life situations, and they can design and undertake inquiries to test those concepts that they've learned. So what this looks like in real life is that we using learnt concepts to generate new inquiries. So you might have learnt about air resistance inside. So we could then undertake an investigation to ask if a parachute with a larger surface area will drop slower. You could do an inquiry looking at different concepts to do with plants. So plants in different environments growing better. So we can get photosynthesis, reproduction experiments. So we could think about experiments that we've done inside and then see if we could reproduce them outside using the natural environment there. So lots of people do wider penguin huddle. Can we do a version of that using the outside as a resource? We can use learned concepts to problem solve. So we've got the maths concepts inside, like calculating volume, measuring volume. Outside, we can use that to measure the volume or calculate the volume of, say, the pond or a unit such as a shed. We can also use learnt skills in a practical setting. So we've learnt about map reading. We're going to now go and follow the map to go for a walk. We've got our design process. We're going to use that to design a structure. We've learned all about what plants need to grow. We're going to use that to grow our plants. We've learned about combustion and what fires need. We're then going to use that to light a fire. And then, of course, our overarching one, our building connections. We're going to use this knowledge of the natural world to understand that they have positive or negative actions, that they can impact the environment, but also they're empowered by their skills to hopefully have a positive impact, to balance that way. And then developing their own values about the natural world, take ownership over the state of the natural world, and then build positive impacts, and then link their outdoor learning to their life choices. So it's not just when they're outside. And what that looks like is they think about their behavior and how it will affect the environment they're working in. So they're making decisions to try not to be negative. So we're not going to pick all the flowers to decorate the den. They have that emotional connection to the outdoors, which leads them to not just protect it while they're outdoors, but think about it in their whole life. So thinking, right, okay, I like being outside. I don't want the plants and the animals to die. Right. Therefore, I'm not going to buy bottled water because I know those bottles are going to the sea and killing animals. I'm going to not use plastic bags because I know the impact that's going to have on the turtles. I'm going to walk to school because I don't want to contribute to global climate change. And then again, cultivating this sense of place within the outdoor environment, the way they connect to it, the way they are part of that interaction, and hopefully developing some personal responsibility for the environment. So what I feel that this outdoor learning framework can achieve when followed is that we're going to actually provide learners who are responsible, ethical citizens, which is what we want with our new curriculum, but also who have skills to explore and care for the natural world. Therefore, we've got a sustainable, worthwhile outcome from developing these learning outdoors. So I think it was well worth if we do integrate some of those. Right, I've gone on too long. I do apologize. I'm afraid we don't have time for breakout rooms. I'm very sorry. But what we were going to talk about is what you do in terms of progression in outdoor learning, and whether there is progression in your outdoor learning, and if we can integrate some more progression. I know you're doing planning now for next year, and I know it's incredibly busy with reports and that. So this is just an option, but thinking about next term, when you're planning for your next school year, thinking about how you can ensure progression in your outdoor learning, either your outdoor learning in your school grounds, field work, or in your residential, bringing that to an outdoor learning coordinator would be a great way of embedding that across your school. Reminder of the resources available. I've got the outdoor challenge cards on the Nature Days website if you're interested in those. And my subscription service is coming on, and hopefully come September, I'm going to start that. That's going to be providing lots of options for outdoor learning, lesson plans and things. There's also the Padlet. So if I close this and I show you the Padlet, so the Padlet, where am I going? Stop share. When you get the PowerPoint, just make sure that you look on the wrong one. At the back page, and then you can click on this, and this is the Padlet, and at the very end we've got progression. So I've got here progression in geography, outdoor learning progression, mainly forest school skills. These are I don't know if you've seen the National Curriculum Outdoors books, but those have got a curriculum for teaching outdoors, obviously with progression, and they asked me to write a Welsh, what did they call it, a parity grid between their books, the National Curriculum Outdoors books, and the Welsh curriculum. To be honest, it's not perfect because our curriculum doesn't link in with the national curriculum, but they asked me to do it and I said I'd try. So if you have got those books, it does, this document that I created does show you where those activities link into our curriculum, but it's not perfect because it wasn't written for the Welsh curriculum. And there's lots of other ones here, and my progression model here is also as a document there that's actually got a framework of assessment for skills, which I don't know whether it's fit for purpose anymore, but if you want to see potential, it's got some potential activities you can do to test to see whether they're what level they're at, and there's some other ones for looking at different outdoor learning skills. So if I go back to that one, so if you click on that, then you'll get the Padlet, and then last of all, please fill in feedback form so I know how to improve or how to make it better. And my next session is next week. That's session 18, looking at how to develop your school grounds. They're coming thick and fast now, so we've only got 3 left, and they're over the next 3 weeks. So we've got that one, then we've got how to be sector leading, and then finally we've got sharing best practice. Before I go, sorry, I'm running over now. If any school or anyone would like to contribute to the sharing best practice or the sharing best practice one, then I'd love to know any ideas that you've done in school that worked. And if you want to contact me with anything, then I will be giving you a small gift as a thank you to contribute to that. So please do contact me if you'd like to. So I hope that was useful. And if you are happy to stay on, and if you want to ask any questions or say anything, then please do. I apologize, I've gone over. Thank you so much for coming. And I'll get this recording and the PowerPoint to you as soon as I can. If anyone wants to ask any questions or anything, if you're happy to stay, if not, goodbye. Thank you. Oh, stop sharing.